Good evening, this is Tim Johnson, and tonight's Brattleboro Selectboard meeting is next here on BCTV. Just a program note, you're watching tonight the Select Board on Channel 8. The Vernon Select Board is on Channel 10 beginning at 6:30. Please do not adjust your set. Coming up tonight on the Brattleboro Select Board meeting, financial guidelines for debt service and fund balance, approval being requested of two financial guidelines. Equipment financing in the amount of $310,000. Town Finance Director John O'Connor will bring that particular matter up. Police and fire project financials, possible financing of the proposed project. The Paint the Pavement pilot project, which I dare you to say more than 3 times fast. The requested action is to approve the policies and procedures to authorize a pilot project in that neighborhood for a 1-year period. In addition, acceptance and appropriation of a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, an anti-displacement policy dealing with Vermont Community Development Program funding, an update on Select Board goals, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns annual business meeting and the appointment of a voting delegate, and meetings to be scheduled on the draft social media policy and the police fire facilities project. All that and more coming up. The Brattleboro Select Board is here tonight on BCTV Channel 8. Thanks for watching.
Good evening, and I would like to reconvene our first regularly scheduled meeting for September 4th. And I would accept a motion for the minutes of Tuesday, August 21st.
I move to approve the minutes from Tuesday, August 21st.
Any additions, corrections, deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 4-0. Chair's remarks, just a couple. I'd like to pass along our condolences to the Gannett family and the Coram family. Senator Gannett passed away about a week and a half ago, and certainly much has been written about him. A real pillar in our community and a very sad loss. Lynn Coram, who I had the pleasure of serving with on the BUHS school board for 4 years, was another pillar of our community, a real advocate for education and the taxpayers, and they will both be missed. Barb, that's all I have. Do you have anything?
No, I don't have anything this evening.
Select Board committee reports. I know that, Christopher, you wanted to say a couple things about Senator Gannett, so
yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to put in my 2 cents on the fact that Brattleboro's really lost its own statesman. Mr. Gannett moved here with his wife Alda and his 3 children, to raise their 3 children, and did so choosing the area carefully. I don't know if it was really widely known that that Bob Gannett was a descendant of William Brattle, for whom Brattleboro is named. He loved this town, and he showed it in the best possible way. We think of some people as being a prince among princes or king among kings. I'd say that Bob Gannett was a citizen's citizen. He was somebody whom I looked up to, and believe me, I'm not the only person here or in town. The family, Bob and his wife, were both hugely active in the community, feeling that what you get out of your community is roughly equivalent to what you put into it. I think they got a tremendous amount of it out of the experience because of what they put into it. Once again, in a world that really needs role models, we had a role model here who made a huge difference in the quality of life in our community, not only in what he did himself, for the community, but in the fact that he was such a role model for others to follow in doing the same thing. And our community and the community at large are both much richer for it. And yes, I will miss Bob Gannett, as will so many others.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
Traffic Safety Committee met last Tuesday. We have on the agenda tonight the Paint the Pavement pilot project. After a review of procedures that we've suggested for those sorts of projects, we've tabled for the next meeting our discussion of the traffic calming measures in general, and we had some concerns raised about the intersection of Williams Street and Whetstone Drive, and we will begin the next Traffic Safety Committee meeting at the end of September with a site visit at 8 o'clock in the morning on Williams Street at the intersection of Whetstone Drive.
Thank you. Okay, public participation. Here's an opportunity for you to weigh in on something that is not on our agenda here this evening. If you would come up to the mic, raise your hand, come up to the microphone when recognized, state your name and the town that you're from, and I'll give you about 2 minutes to talk about, again, anything that is not on our agenda here this evening. Okay, we're all set with that. No liquor commissioners this evening, no water commissioners. All right, first up, A.
The board is asked to review and discuss and, if appropriate, approve 2 financial guidelines. One is on debt management and the other is on fund balance. I'm going to let John O'Connor, the finance director, speak to these. Just to say real quickly that one of the reasons you look at these together is because they do impact, it really makes the most sense to look at these together, seeing how much you're putting aside in the fund balance versus how much what your debt is. You really need to be looking at both of those together. So with that, John?
Thank you, Barb. The first guideline is the debt management guideline, and its purpose is to really kind of give us some guidance on the maximum amount of debt that the town should take on for the general fund. And if you turn to the second page of that guideline, you can see that there are 2 measures that we're proposing for measuring the amount of debt that would seem to be appropriate for the town of Brattleboro. The first is indebtedness per capita, and that number is $1,500 per capita is the amount that we're proposing to establish as the maximum amount of general fund debt for the town as a guideline. The second one is the debt service, which includes both principal and interest payments, as a percent of the general fund expenditures. And that number, we're suggesting that guideline should be measured at 12.5% as the maximum. So those are the 2 measures, and that is the guideline. To give you some perspective on those numbers, the $1,500 per capita is a little higher than most of the towns in the state, or the average for the towns in the state. The overall average for the towns in the state is $699. Our current debt per capita is $350, $360 actually. So this policy is designed looking forward at the potential of actually funding a police and fire facility and setting guidelines that would allow us to move ahead with that project. So yes, our debt level is our percent of debt service as a percent of our general fund expenditures is 5.1%, and our indebtedness per capita is $360 currently. Any questions?
One of the things, just to make clear for the folks, is that these are guidelines as opposed to policies. The amount of debt that's taken on is really a function of representative town meeting, and because they are who approves our debt. This is also a debt policy for the general fund. It's not for our enterprise funds. There are times when your indebtedness may be higher than this. There may be times when it's lower than this. This is just kind of a guideline. There are a number of, it's kind of hard to come up with a set number because so many things depend. Your debt management also depends on several other factors. It can depend on your growth. It can depend on the economy. It can depend on, at this point, you can go into debt, but it's pretty good interest rates at this point. You're going to get a lot better interest rate than you are in a savings account. So there are a lot of things that are looked at when looking at debt. So again, this is a guideline that the board and the administration should be using when we are working on our budgets and when we are making proposals to our representative town meeting. And there are also guidelines that should be used when reviewing the financial audit each year. Because again, it's looking at, well, how are we doing in relationship to these guidelines.
Questions? Go ahead, Christopher.
Thank you. John, where did these numbers come from? Is this League of Cities and Towns, or is this a general?
This guideline is from the League of Cities and Towns, from their model policies.
Okay. I thought it'd be interesting to ask how that per capita indebtedness would change if we were to take on say a $14.5 million bond. What would it bump that $360 figure up to, and what would the percent of total general fund expenditures would that look like?
That would bring it pretty much to those two numbers that we're proposing.
Oh, it would?
It would.
Sort of maxing out the credit card?
Depending on the cost of the project, but
Okay.
based on our latest estimates, that's about where it would end up.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Proposed fund balance.
Right.
David, excuse me.
Well, I have some specific line item edits, and I don't really want to burden the meeting by going through them, but before we adopt, I have some suggested changes to the language that I'd like to pass on there. I would also just comment that I think that having a debt management guideline, while a useful tool for this municipality, this debt management guideline is sort of misleading in that we're not talking about the debt that's being incurred by the other municipalities that function here. And in fact, the amount of debt that we are paying off as Brattleboro homeowners and taxpayers is substantially higher than what's reflected here. For example, I think we borrowed $30 million to build the water and sewer project, which is, if it's per capita, about $3,000 per capita, although a big chunk of the water and of the sewage treatment plant is paid off by fees that come from businesses. But it is about $3,000 per capita that we're paying. And the BUHS project, we borrowed somewhere between $35 to $50 million, and that was spread out across all of the member towns. But once again, that's a significant burden that we pay and still pay as part of our annual taxes. So this is important for us to focus on here at the town level and with respect to the general fund, but it's not really an accurate picture of all of the indebtedness that we've incurred for the projects that are that are currently underway here. And I want to thank the Finance Committee for putting it on our radar. I know it's not policy that we've got presented to us here, and rather as guideline, but I don't think that we really would have even gotten to this point, particularly unless the Finance Committee had done all of the work it's done over the last years and presented these issues to us right before town meeting last year. So I really want to thank Spoon and Timber here. So I want to thank you and the other members of the Finance Committee for the work you've been doing.
Yes. Mr. Agave?
Stuart Agave, not precisely representing the finance committee, but I don't know, maybe because we just saw these at our last meeting last Tuesday and have not really had time to go over them in depth. There's a lot of other information that's involved here. We met with Bob Giroux, the executive director of the State Municipal Bond Bank last week, and got a lot of interesting information from him. In the course of that conversation, he noted that, in fact, although roughly he wouldn't swear to the numbers that the average debt in the state is about 700, but he felt like that per capita, but he felt like that was pretty accurate. He also mentioned that currently the highest municipal debt in the state per capita is Montpelier at 1,200. So what's being proposed here is yet 300 higher than that. That isn't necessarily a reason not to go that high, but it's certainly a reason to know what that means to the town, to the finances, to the tax rate, et cetera, et cetera. As I said, the Finance Committee has not really looked that over. There are, as Barb says, a lot of different factors to look at. The current situation in terms of interest rates and the economy and all sorts of things. Probably the most important thing of all is, when we look at this, is what impact does this have on the town? And when we say the town, what does that mean to the citizen? David was speaking to that issue. Each time we raise the tax rate 1%, how much does that raise actual taxes to people? If we had felt, for instance, last year, that the taxpayers couldn't pay any more, and yet now we're saying, well, maybe they can pay 10 cents more or 12 cents more. I don't know. We really have to look at these things hard. These guidelines are very expansive, to say the least. And maybe I'll just stop right here, but with only again that the Finance Committee hasn't really analyzed this well yet, and that the board should be exercising a lot of caution.
Oh, okay. To clarify, is this a new guideline, or is this a change over one that was existing, or?
It's new.
It's new.
We do not currently have either a debt management guideline or a fund balance guideline.
And is this something the board asked for previously, or town meeting reps asked, or just something the administration came up with? Or?
It was something that's been discussed the last several times we've done budgets. We've looked at our debt service. We've also looked at our fund balance. The Finance Committee specifically made recommendations on having those policies in the board in their goals adopted. That is one of the goals, is to look at these types of policies.
Okay, thank you.
Tim?
Tim Cuthbertson. Similar to Spoon's position, I'm a member of the Finance Committee, but not speaking on behalf of the Finance Committee at this point. Hi, Dora.
Hi.
I have just a couple of quick comments on the two policies, or the two documents. Let's not call them policies at this point. The first is that the language in these documents is something that the Finance Committee has looked at extensively. I mean, this is language that's been going backwards and forwards between the Town Manager's Office, the Finance Director, and our committee for, certainly in the case of the fund balance policy, for well over a year now, maybe 18 months. We were looking at it before our recommendation last year. In fact, we started looking at it with John Leisenring, the prior Finance Director. The second thing is that we learnt a lot about fund definitions and what all these balances are within the general fund. And just as it stands as the fund balance policy as a definition of each of the areas of the general fund, it's an excellent document and it's very clarifying. Perhaps the single biggest difference between where the Finance Committee and this proposal sits is not so much in language, but in terms of the level of unassigned funds. The unassigned fund balance we had looked at and thought in terms of a figure that was 2 months' worth of operating budget, which, if you calculate that out, 16.6% of operating budget. This plan, or this proposal here, this document here, puts it at 10%. So that's about 5 weeks, or 5.2 weeks, if you want to look at it that way. I think the board should seriously consider whether 10% is adequate, whether 2 months is too much. You know, is there a number somewhere in between that you should fall on, or is 10% the correct one? So I ask you to give that some thought. If I'm correct, 10% is about 1.4 million. It's like 10% of fund budget, 1.4 million. We were probably looking for just a little bit more than that. 1.4 million might sound quite a lot, but I believe that our unassigned fund balance at this point in time is 1.2 or somewhere fairly close. I mean, it's not so far off. It's not a huge stretch. As David had mentioned, there are, I don't want to weasel word the policy, but there are a couple of areas that, or one area that just stands for correction. That's the policy itself. It says it's the goal of the town and village. I don't know whether we're still a village, but it should be the town of Brattleboro. It's the policy of the town of Brattleboro, unless you're referring to the West Village, I suppose. Otherwise, it's very similar to the wording that we had used before. For the debt management policy, we as a finance committee had looked at a number of ways of clarifying this, and David is absolutely right. The debt burden on the town is significantly above the $1,500 per capita. There's a separation in our mind between municipal debt burden and the enterprise fund burden and the education fund burdens. And we had made an effort to separate that out in our thinking. We had looked at as a guideline at the ratings agencies, Moody's being one of them, and small cities of population approximately 50,000 or less, with the average being about 12,000, which is where we sit, and with the budget, or an average budget of 12 million, slightly less than ours, the national average is about 8.25%. So at 12%, we would be going a little higher than that, but clearly the capability or the borrowing power or the borrowing capability of the community would stand going to 12%, and it's something which is moving all the time. As you start a project, it's high, and then as you start paying it down, it goes down. One of the interesting things that I think should be borne in mind here is that this community is actually self-regulating. We can't just borrow $40 million without going to the town reps and saying, please give us the $40 million, and this is why, and this is how much it's going to cost you. So to some degree, these truly are guidelines rather than policy, because ultimately you do have to get the town reps to sign off on it. Whether $1,500 per capita and 12.5% is the correct numbers, again, I would just ask the board to give it their full consideration in terms of setting that level. Thank you.
Thank you.
last thing, sorry. By the way, thank you for considering these policies and putting this on the agenda. It's two pieces that were missing from the town's financial management policy portfolio, if you like, and I think I don't know whether these are the last two, but certainly these are two significant policies that we'll have to say we're very pleased that they're being considered. Thank you.
Christopher?
Yeah, I'd like to query Mr. Agave if I could. You said you were speaking for yourself and not necessarily the committee?
Well, because we haven't had a meeting on it.
Mm-hmm.
So we did speak. We had a chance to roll it around a few minutes at the end of our last meeting. I think there's a pretty good sense of where we're at. So I'm just saying that we don't have a final or official position now.
Okay, because I remember at town meeting last year, you were called on, you got up and you said that as a general matter, the town ought to be just raising taxes. And I heard you say just now that we ought to be very careful about how we consider raising taxes. And I was wondering if there's been a change in your thinking on that.
I can't recall the context of the conversation that we were having last year that evoked that response from me. So I can't, I'm not sure. Certainly, I have learned a lot more since then and now because we have been looking into all of these things and looking up policies from municipalities all over the place, in Vermont, out of Vermont, and I see more the complexity of this, and beginning more to understand, or when we ask ourselves what impact will this have on the town, what impacts exactly are we talking about? Is it the impact of the town to borrow more money? Is it the impact of the citizens to repay this money? And perhaps more things. But I'm okay with the things I've said so far.
All right, well, thank you. I was just trying to square the two sets of remarks, and that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. In the fund balance guidelines, I have to tell you that, and this would be no surprise to Barb, is that I have concern, actually listening to Tim and Spoon here this evening, about raising taxes to have a fund balance. When we're concerned about impact on taxes in our community, that if we were below a certain number, that we would have to raise the taxes so we could put it in the bank for a rainy day fund. And that concerns me. Any number that you put there, it's an arbitrary number. And you can say, well, 2 months of operating cost. You pick something and throw the dart at it. But I can tell you, as a sitting board member, and one of the things that I had recommended that this be guidelines and not policy, for one reason that we have no authority over this money, that when we do want to use it, we need town meeting approval. And to sit in budgets as I have for the past several years, and when every penny is tight, and then to sit there and say, oh, by the way, we can't do this project because we have to add, and again, an arbitrary number is $200,000 to put in a fund balance. That's very difficult for me. And so I'm glad that this is a guideline. I am somewhat uncomfortable with the 10%, but I actually don't have a number to suggest to you here. But would be willing to revisit this, wanting to revisit this at a later date, actually, especially after David has some definition changes or grammar changes that he wants to submit.
I had more in the debt management guidelines than in the fund balance. I would just briefly note that at town meeting, we usually face pressure to spend down the fund balance. And I think as we learned this year when we were responding to Hurricane Irene, having this money in the bank made a really big difference for us. And there were other municipalities that didn't have the money and had to borrow at much more expensive rates. And I think that it's a good idea to have an aspirational goal of this kind of money to be kept in the bank, and it's easier then to communicate to town meeting when they want to spend down the fund balance to defray taxes, that we need this money in order to be able to operate. We're operating a big business here, and I understand your concerns, but I think that it does respond to the pressures we often face. Essentially, the Finance Committee is saying we need to have money in the bank, even if town meeting says let's make our taxes lower.
Well, I must tell you that I've seen a quantum change in town meeting members in terms of spending that money. Before I became a select board member and was a town meeting member, there were motions that were approved to take that reserve fund and put it on the revenue side, which was a Band-Aid. In the past 7 years, town meeting members have responded to the select board's wishes, and although we have had numerous requests from the body to spend this money in other areas, the body has actually looked to the select board for its guidance and followed our wishes. Now, that's probably not always going to be the case, but to see that change in a short period of time gives me hope to say that you're right, whether it's 10%, whether it's 8%, and we say that we want to keep this money, that we hope that they continue to follow the board and what we're recommending to them. So,
I just point out that I sat down with the town manager early on in my tenure on the board and passed on to her, or perhaps it was one of these public meetings, a citizen's request that we consider spending down the accumulated surplus in lieu of, and in so doing, reduce the tax rate. And Barb came back to me and said, well, look, we really need a cash cushion there, otherwise we have to borrow, and it's not always easy to borrow. And then we had Hurricane Irene. And I read a number of stories in the newspaper about towns that found themselves dreadfully short of funds and had to go out and borrow large sums in order to pay their share of costs. So the question is raised here for John as finance director and Barb as town manager. Judging from the disaster we just went through, from a financial point of view, what does that experience indicate to you that a good fund balance would be appropriate for the town of Brattleboro? And I'm not asking you to just give me an answer right now, a firm figure. I mean, if you have it, throw it out. I'd love to know it. But what do you think, now that we've really seen among the worst things that can happen to our town and how to pay for the recovery, what is really a good figure based on experience?
Well, I mean, I'll just say that our recommendation is in front of you.
That's your recommendation.
But at the same time, I mean, I'll continue to say that you can't look at these as a static document. They're not static. You have to look at it on in terms of what's going on in the world you live right now. You have to look, meaning, well, what's your grand list like? What are some of the needs that there are? Are you doing a project that's a once in a 50 to 100 year project? Or are you doing a, or those kinds of things? You have to look at it it's like setting the budget. When you're working on the budget, and each line item in your head you can kind of justify, but then at the end and you're looking at it and you see that, wow, now we're up 10%. And in the whole, that doesn't make sense. So you go back and you try to look at the pieces again. This is a piece. And what you need to do is look and say, okay, you know, what are all the other pieces and how is it going to play? I don't think there is if there was a magic number, you know, everybody'd be using it. There'd be a formula, you put your money in, you know, you put your numbers in and you come up with it. And I don't think that exists. I think that it requires both staff and board members to every year reassess where we're at and where we're going. I think the biggest take-home message really in looking at these guidelines is, for me, and I hope for the board, is we need to be spending a lot of time looking at our financial audit. And we need to become intimately knowledgeable of the audit and what it's telling us. And we need to be looking at the management report in that audit that's doing kind of the retrospect, because that's the history. And that's important when you're looking at your budget for the upcoming year. And then what's the other thing you have to look at? You have to look at your future, and you have to say, well, what are the other needs? What are the competing needs that are going on? So I think that, you know, we put this in as a guideline, but that doesn't mean it's not a black and white situation. It requires kind of a better understanding. And, you know, like we're looking at these policies, one of the things that you're not looking at the same time is your actual debt service. You know, and so, you know, we know where we're at. You know, John just told us we're at 3.6% of debt. What does that mean? What does that look like? What does that mean in 5 years and 10 years? You know, it's moving. Sure. It's not static, and it's meant to help with the question of what's the financial health of the town, and it should help with prioritizing your future needs.
May I follow up?
One more.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So, did we have enough cash to tide us over after Irene?
Yes.
Before money? Yeah.
Yes.
How much did we need? I mean, before we started getting reimbursements and things like that.
Close to $1 million.
Okay. And we had it?
We had it.
What do we have now? Or rather, what do we have roughly? You know, we see the basically an income statement of what David calls this big business, but we didn't see a balance sheet. So I'm curious what that was at the end of the year pre-audit.
The unassigned fund balance, and I think we talked about this at the last meeting,
I
was
think
somewhere
we might.
around $1 million.
Just $1 million. $1 million. Do you, in your experience, feel that that's an adequate amount? And so I'm not saying, you know, per some formula. I'm saying in your judgment.
The average in the state is 12.84%.
Yeah.
From the bond bank's information. So we're a little below that.
Okay.
And we're a little below our target of 10%.
Okay. Okay. So basically, because we had a fund balance, we didn't have to go to the bank. We could borrow from ourselves, basically. We had what we needed because we had a fund balance.
Yep.
So it just really wouldn't make a lot of sense from a contingency planning point of view to spend down a fund balance.
To a point. Again, there's always a to a point.
Okay.
Because at some point, I mean, what is the emergency you're saving for? You know, you don't know what that amount is. You know, you could, you know, so there's always a point in which there's some diminishing return.
Sure.
Of, you know, does it make sense? Well, we think we should have $2 million in fund balance, so let's raise taxes by a certain amount to get up to that. There's a diminishing return in that. You know, that doesn't make sense. And so it's you know, it's not, again, there's just not a set set number. We have history that we can look at, and we have future needs that we're aware of.
Okay. Well, that helps. That's. I was just looking for perspective. Thank you very much.
Tim, before I call on you, David, We have a motion here. Are your changes substantial grammar changes, or
I
are
think
they
that-
minor?
I think the Finance Committee asked that they have a chance to review this before the motion is considered. And I think that, given that they've studied the issue, and the committee really should have an opportunity to look at it before we make the motion. So my preference would be to know when the next meeting is, for me to give my line edits to John, and then to have this on another agenda just to adopt it after they've had an opportunity to look at it, because they've really been the vanguard, it seems to me.
I didn't,
There's not a motion.
no, I know there's not a motion, but I didn't look at the meeting schedule. That's usually, Ken, is there a Finance Committee meeting scheduled?
September 11th.
September 11th, so we will, we didn't get a motion on this, so we will just
Maybe it'll be on the agenda for the 18th.
leave it on the agenda for the 18th. Tim?
If I mention two things. First of all, unassigned fund balance is spendable resources. It's not, to be really clear, it's not something which we tuck away in a bank account and never, never, never touch again.
That's correct.
It's spendable resources, and the community, the town, the select board can decide to spend those resources as they deem fit. The second thing is that, to the same point, is the policy recommends that if we go above, if we have unassigned balances that are above the 10% or the number that's in here, that number, those funds are used. We don't just keep building it up and building it up for a rainy day just in case. And I think Bob was making that point. We just now that, when is it diminishing returns? The policy or the guidelines explicitly state, go above that number, spend it, use it, or not necessarily spend it, use it, put it into, whatever it is, buying equipment, reducing taxes. The third thing is that if we're below the 10% guidelines, there's nothing in the policy that explicitly states how fast you make that back up again. It just states that if the fund balance falls, efforts should be undertaken to restore the balance. The select board could decide that we're going to restore it over 5 years. The select board could have a very low budget year with a surplus of 500,000, and it restores itself without even thinking about it, which is kind of how we've got to the 1 million or the 1.2 million we have now. It was zero not so very long ago.
It was zero for a lot of years, and
Yeah.
one of the things that memory loss is that happens to all of us, but we were operating in a deficit, and I'm proud to say that we now have money in the bank, and actually we have $1 million in the bank, and we just paid $400,000 cash this past year for a fire truck.
Yep.
So the good fiduciary responsibility of the board and town meeting members, and you're standing there up in front of me going, well, if it gets over 10%, let's go spend it here, let's go spend it there. So, always we want to have a good conversation on what that money is going to be spent on. Not that we have a pile of money, let's go and spend it.
I'm not suggesting for 1 second, Dick, that it should be spent frivolously. I'm just saying that the guidelines, or the guideline is setting a core practical position for the municipality to have as a reserve. Now, when the reserve, that's just being prudent, and I don't think we're going beyond that. We're saying that should we get a windfall in some sense, then that can be allocated or used however the board or the town reps deem fit. If we are under our prudent level, then we take due diligence to get to the level which we consider to be prudent. That's what the policy is indicating. And the number, if it's $1 million or 1.2 or something like that, clearly we have very recent indications of what worked. So, thank you.
We're in agreement. Next item.
Equipment financing, John.
Okay, so there's a memo in your packet on equipment financing, and we had been leasing our municipal equipment. And this year I'm proposing that we finance the purchases through a loan from Merchants Bank, a 3-year note from Merchants Bank. And you can see I got bids from 3 banks, Merchants, People's United, and TD. Merchants and People's United responded with a bid, and TD told me that they are no longer issuing term loans to municipalities. So the two bids that came in, you can see Merchants is a 3-year term at 2.06% with a prepayment permitted. Merchants' 5-year term was 2.23 with prepayment permitted. People's United 3-year term was 2.1, so just slightly higher, but no prepayment permitted. And their 5-year term was 2.5% with no prepayment permitted. So if you can turn the sheet over, and on the back is the analysis of the bids. And you can see that the interest payments for People's 3-year note would be $13,120. Interest payments on the People's 5-year would be $23,250, so almost $10,000 more. Merchants' 3-year term was $12,772, and their 5-year term was $20,739, so about $8,000 less to go with the 3-year term. So my recommendation is to award the loan to Merchants on a 3-year note.
Motion, please.
Well, I'll move that we approve, I will move to approve the town financing the purchase of equipment in the amount of $310,000 with a 3-year note from Merchants Bank with a 2.06% interest rate with prepayment permitted.
Further discussion?
I have a question.
Shoot.
Yeah, I see that you approached 3 banks, but there were 3 others that came to mind. I think the Citizens and Key and the Savings and Loan, and I was just wondering, you just want 3 bids, or you go after the others as well? Are they not in the business, or?
These 3 banks had been actively in the municipal
Okay,
loan business.
great. Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you.
Next, there was a request to discuss possible financing of the police fire project. Later in the meeting, we're actually going to be setting up another meeting where we'll be discussing, where the board will again look at kind of some of the final numbers, proposed numbers, and sketches. But at this point, we're really just looking at the financing. And what John has put together, this is kind of his meeting tonight, is looked at kind of bond rates as well as the 1%. There was a request to look at the 1% sales tax to use that as possible funding for the project. In the packet the board received, it was using a number of 12 million. We're actually currently, that was what 12 million was what the project was in 2001. I think we're currently at 14.3 million. But John he has redone the sheet to look at 14.6, which is where the number had been prior to Dick and David coming and reviewing the finances. So it doesn't really change the scope of the discussion for the board. The other things that you have, just as a reminder, in January of this year, the board did talk about the 1% local option sales tax, and at that point we put out a couple different memos with regard to exemptions, what was exempt from that sales tax, medical exemptions, medical equipment, oxygen, those types of things. The food and beverages are exempt, motor vehicles are exempt, a manufacturing exemption, newspaper exemption, packaging exemptions, agricultural machinery and equipment are exempt from the sales tax, residential fuel is exempt, fuel for farming is exempt, computers are exempt, and so I did put that back and gave that to the board this evening so you could just have a remembrance of what things you're really looking at that would be what the 1% local option tax could be applied to. Again, just quickly for the public, there are 3 local options. Towns, because we are not a home rule state, towns and municipalities are limited to only a certain type of, they're limited by the state on what they can tax, what other revenue sources they can use to generate additional revenue. The towns have been granted 3 types of local option tax. It's a meals and alcohol tax, a rooms tax, and a local option tax. All of them are at 1%. We, several years back, the representative town meeting adopted the local option tax options for meals and liquor as well as for rooms. So this is the 3rd one. And with that, I'm going to let John go over with you his spreadsheet.
Okay, thanks, Barb. So let's just go from the top to the bottom, and I'll explain what we have here. The first line, we have taxable sales from 2007 through 2011. Then we have the local option sales tax, the net amount that we would receive based on the 1% sales tax. And we basically would get 67.5% of that 1%. We have the grand list listed there, and we have the amount of the loan that we'd be taking out, $14.6 million. Then we have the columns for the first 10 years of a 20-year bond. And 20 years is the maximum bond that we could take out. And you can see in year 1, the numbers 388,764 is the debt service. Year 1, we only pay interest. There's no principal payment in the first year of a bond. So the sales tax would generate $660,000 roughly, leaving us a net positive balance of $271,000. So really, if we were to implement the sales tax in the first year of the bond, it would actually generate more money than we would need for the debt service. Second year, that jumps to $1,214,000, and we would need to fund, if we're going to use the sales tax as part of the funding source, we'd still need to raise the taxes $554,000. And you can see the impact on the tax rate. Tax rate would need to go up almost 5 cents if we were to use the dual funding sources. If we didn't use the dual funding sources, the tax rate in year 2 would go up 10.8%. So, and then you can just go down and you can see how it drops over time slowly. And the bottom of the page, the first 4 columns for the first 10 years are funding only with property taxes. What is the impact on a property owner? So year 2, $100,000 property, their property taxes would go up $107.86 if we only use property taxes to fund the project. If we use property taxes and the sales tax in year 2, that $100,000 property, their taxes would go up $49.25. And you can see the rest of the numbers there and the impact on various other property owners with property valuations that are a little different than the $100,000.
This actually here would be $800,000. So the impact in year 2.
I have a couple of questions, John.
Yes?
First,
Okay, then this regular number that we...
there's a significant drop in taxable sales between fiscal year 08 and 09. And it can't be that we were all of a sudden selling $16 million less in goods and services in town from what had been a pretty stable 113, 14, 15 million to 98 or 99 million. Can you tell us what is the change? Was there a change in what is and is not taxed between those 2 years?
I believe that is the case. I haven't been able to get a hold of the tax department to confirm that, though.
If you could check that out, as maybe when shoes and clothing
I think it's like
were no longer subject to sales tax, but if you could just verify that for us.
I will do that.
No, this is sales tax on goods and service, on goods. My other question, John,
Yes.
is really just as between the original sheet and the one that you handed out today. We're talking about essentially $2.5 million more that's being financed from 12 million, as you included in the first handout,
Right.
to 14.6. It's essentially 20% more, but the payments seem to have gone up almost 50% as they're calculated. I just want to make sure that that's correct, and if so, why? Because, for example, on the $100,000 house, without the sales tax, with the sales tax, I'm sorry, we're going from, what, $30 to $49.25 in that first year?
Mm-hmm.
On the $250,000 house, it's going from 75 to 123. It may be that it's just the way the numbers work out once you take the 660 off, but I'm wondering if you could just double check why there's such a big difference when we just increase it by $2.5 million.
Okay, I will do that.
Thanks. You see what I'm
I do.
pointing out?
I do.
Thanks. You see that, Bob? Just a very big difference.
You're looking at from year 1 to 2?
Well, I'm just looking
Or
between the $12 million financing.
Oh, between the two sheets.
Between the two sheets. It may be that the difference arises just because you're taking the 660 out, and that's the way it works out proportionally. But if you can just check those, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Ken Schneck.
Can we back up a step, just so I'm clear, and maybe other people are clear on the difference between what we're doing now and what we'd be doing at the meeting that we're setting at the end? I'm just not sure how in depth to go right now, because I don't know the difference between this agenda item and what we're setting at the end.
Basically, what the board is doing is looking at saying there's a question on if there was a 1% local option sales tax that was utilized to for payment of a bond. And again, there's a lot of assumptions that are being made. One is the assumption of a cost. One is the assumption that you would be bonding the entire amount. So there are a lot of assumptions that are being made. But what would be the difference if if the town implemented a 1% sales tax with the idea of applying it to a bond payment? So it's not necessarily, as far as the conversation goes, it's really about 1% local sales option.
It's on the agenda tonight in this form because at the agenda setting meeting, we discussed that we had a presentation about 4 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago. Dick and I have met with Barb and the department heads and the, what are they called, the contractors?
The architects.
The architects to see what the costs might be and to go over the costs line by line. And I think that we've gotten to a point where, having gone through the cost line by line, we've got a pretty good idea about how well we can get the project. And two things need to be presented together when we really start to present this for public discussion and possible approval. It's both the cost of the project and the financing. And since we're going to have a meeting sometime in the next 1, 2, 3 weeks to try to finalize those ideas before we go to 2 informational meetings and then before we go to a town meeting to seek approval, I thought it was a good idea to get this option for financing in public so people at least had an idea of what we were talking about before we discussed it at a special meeting.
Okay. So the idea, I'm sorry. So the idea is not, I'm just trying to understand process. The idea is not that we have this settled before our next piece.
No, but this
It's
was
just
an initial discussion so that we all knew where we were. And
And,
people heard it on TV too,
and
or in the newspaper.
there's a whole process before, the select board doesn't have the authority
Right,
to
no,
do
that I
this.
know.
Obviously, you know that. And, but we wouldn't be going forward with it unless there was support from the select board to present this to town meeting members. Now, I'm sure that because this is only discussion, when we get down to the meat and potatoes of this, that we're certainly going to hear from a lot of the business community, just as we heard from the restaurant community when we did the 1% sales tax, rooms and meals tax also. And so what we're trying to feel out here also is generally how board members feel about this. And also, as you can see, what the savings would be to taxpayers in terms of having this 1% sales tax. I have been a supporter of the 1% sales tax for many a year for capital projects, and obviously this would be a star project to use these funds for. And so I'm hoping that this project goes hand in hand, the 1% sales tax, because you can see the impact here when you look at if this got approved, and it gets approved without the 1% sales tax. It has a pretty significant impact. I mean, it has an impact even with, but you're looking in year, you look at year 2 on a $100,000 house, you're talking about $107 a year. Now that's outside the other pressures that you have with your annual budget and anything else that's approved at town meeting. And so this is what that payment would be, separate from all those other things. So I am hoping that there's support on the board for this. I know that it most likely wouldn't be 100%, but if you look at what impact that it can have on the taxpayers as a whole, because I look at us as a tourist town, and we generate significant dollars from outside the community. And they utilize the services that these would be going for. And so, for me, this is a no-brainer here in terms of that 1%.
So then it strikes me that there's some sort of companion piece that goes along with this, because this is very much the cost to the homeowners. And I don't know what the companion piece would be that we would pair this with, but something that more reflects the effects on businesses. I don't know what that would be or what that would look like, but it just strikes me that this is, especially if we're anticipating that there will be a response from business owners, then we probably need to pair this up with something that would grease those wheels, or at least address that, if that's possible. I don't know.
Dora?
Well, and to sort of follow what Ken is saying, I think there's other pieces, because where's the cost comparison? Because yes, there are a lot of people who are from out of town that shop in Brattleboro, but there's also a lot of local people who shop in Brattleboro. Where's the cost comparison to what they might be paying in taxes versus what they might be paying in sales tax? I don't know if you can get those kind of figures, but there's, that needs to be looked at too.
Well, Dora, that's a good point, because I don't think that you can get those numbers. But the reality is here, when you look at this 1%, and I look, and I always ask this question, you would have to spend $10,000 through the course of the year to generate $100 in the 1% sales tax. $10,000. Now, I always ask people, in your discretionary spending, are you spending $10,000 a year? I'm not. I don't think anybody on the board is. And so you go and you say, well, yeah, you have to look at real life examples. And that's what you break this down. And to say, even if you did, are you spending it all at one time? Now, the business community is, they're not going to support this. I don't blame them. But we have to look at the totality of the town. And this isn't just about the business community, it's about the effect that the taxes have on the whole community. And that's where the discussion needs to be focused, not just on business, but the impact of this project on the whole town. I mean, there's people that when we did this water and sewer project, there's some people who don't have water or sewer from the town. There's some people who have one or the other, but those people are benefiting from the industries that could be coming to Brattleboro and increasing our grand list and reducing our taxes. And yet they're not contributing because they have their own water or sewer or either other. So, David?
I think in response to Ken's question, there is a risk that we will experience some level of reduced sales because there's a 1% sales tax. But in terms of the impact on the everyday homeowner and resident of the town of Brattleboro, the categories of food and beverages, clothing, and fuel for residences are all excluded from what is subject to sales tax. So the primary purchases that we're spending our money on, food, clothing, and fuel, are exempted from the sales tax. And it certainly seems to me that we need to consider finding alternate sources to pay for the fire and police facility than just putting it on the backs of the real estate tax payers here in town. And that's why I'm seriously willing to consider it and think that it's probably a good way to defray the costs.
Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I can present this when we talk about it next. I'm sorry that I didn't have it for tonight, but I'm looking at some of the state data where the gross receipts in Brattleboro have been trending lower in the past 5 years. And that's a piece of this puzzle, and an important one, especially because expenses have been going up. Sales are kind of stagnant, expenses are going up. I'm just looking for a more full context. So I can it doesn't mean that I'm not considering this. I just want to make sure that we have the whole picture.
Right. And again, I always say look at yourself first and your spending patterns. I talk to a lot of people, and you're going on vacation. The first thing are you looking at what are the rooms and meals tax in the town that you're going through or the city that you're going through, or what are the sales taxes in the town or city that you go to. They're non-discussion items. They really don't. You just go where you want to go and do what you want to do. And so from that standpoint, I think you have to start there. Christopher?
Yeah, I think, Ken, the one thing that would be helpful to see is that once you look at these exemptions, what you're looking at in the sales that are taxable are essentially consumer goods. And yes, there's been a trend downward over the past 5 years from 2007 through fiscal year 2011. And I think that it's important to realize the larger context of the national recession. I think that's quite material because consumer purchases are largely discretionary. Food and fuel are not on this list. Automobiles aren't either. And so you've got these big three basic expenses that would be exempt from taxation. And exempt from the numbers here. And so I think it is really incumbent on us to try to tease out from there. And I don't know who could do it or how, but is there a long secular trend of reduced consumer goods sales, or are we looking at a slice of a curve that looks like this in the business cycle, where what we're measuring is from the top to the trough, because we're just emerging now, basically, from our recession. So these numbers may be influenced more by the recession than by any other secular trend that somebody else has in mind to argue. And so it does make the job more difficult, but I do think it makes it more interesting and worthwhile to pursue. And using raw data from the state, I think, is a little suspect, although I can see that it's a good idea to look at the data from a larger population. And so I just put that in to help, because you are looking for context. That's a big one. It's huge. So is Brattleboro emerging from this recession with a growing amount of sales that would be subject to taxation? I'd say that that when you're looking at consumer expenditures, you're also looking at the expenditures in Vermont's largest industry, which is tourism. So if tourism is going up, and we are emerging from a recession, and the unemployment rate is going down, I'd say that there may not actually be a correlation. That this is not going to be predictive. And that's really important in the decision that we have to make. It's huge. So that's my read on that.
Anybody from the public would like to make a...
Just a quick clarification, not clarification, but understanding. That is, we've got $100 million worth of taxable sales. I'm going to round the numbers, okay? And from that 100 million, 1% is 1 million, of which we get 667%, 670,000. It seems to me that if we just looked at the per capita impact of that, which is I'm going to pay 10,000 to make it round numbers, even though we're 12,000, and it was only paid for by Brattleboro residents, we would have to spend per head the $10,000 that David has just been talking about, that we're all claiming we don't spend. So, to Ken's point, somebody should figure out. I mean, I know I'm not spending 10,000. You just stated that the board isn't spending 10,000. So, what is the financial impact on the residents, and what portion of it goes to the, let's call it, those from outside? It's 10,000 a head, roughly. Perhaps someone could think about that or comment.
Well, but, I mean, the fact is that it's not just the tourism that Dick is referring to. Brattleboro is the commercial hub of this southeastern Vermont community. And I think, and I've said this for a number of years, that we have to spend more for municipal services, more for fire, more for police, more for roads and the like, because we serve as the commercial hub. And we don't only raise these funds through the sales tax from tourists. There's people from all the outlying towns who come into Brattleboro to shop. And we are financing, as homeowners, the physical plant that facilitates that commercial hub's existence. And so this spreads, it seems to me, the costs more broadly than just saddling them right on residential and business taxpayers here in town. That's why I'm in favor.
Barb?
You're looking at there's two sectors that are impacted by it. The first are your residents. And I think if you look, so you look at a $150,000 home funded with property taxes only, funding the project in this case with property taxes only versus with a mix of sales tax and property tax, there's an $88 difference a year. Okay. So the individual, the homeowner, would have to buy essentially $8,800 worth of things in town to break even, to make that difference up, okay? Most residents, because of unless they're doing something somewhat different in a particular year, might not be doing that, would not probably spend that. However, then the question becomes, with the sector, the other sector that gets impacted, which is the business sector. And the question for them then becomes, if there is an additional 1% on my sales tax, are some people going to say, I'll go over to Hinsdale or Keene, or I'll go up to Rockingham, or I'll go up to some of the other towns, and I think, and that's why, in my opinion, it's hard to give you what you're looking for to compare those things, because the reality is, at what point does that 1% impact how people behave? If you're buying something, when as an individual do you say to yourself, before an extra 1%, I'm going to drive to wherever, and so part of it's difficult because there are two sectors that are impacted. If I'm a business owner, I might not want to take the chance. But if I'm a business owner who lives in town, maybe I would. You know, I think the information that you're looking for, you know, we can try to find of, you know, so when some of the other towns in the state of Vermont did a 1% sales tax, what was the impact on their, from one year to the next, on their sales? You know, you can look, and again, you'd be making a huge assumption as saying that, well, that 1%, any increase or decrease in the sales is attributable to that 1% sales tax, which I'm not sure how you can, get to that information.
It's pretty hard to compare Burlington, Stowe. Actually, Wilmington, just this past March, has just approved the 1% rooms, meals, and sales tax. And so to go and look at their data, because there's also other factors, you know, we're looking at some reduced numbers here. Is that because of the recession?
Oh, because of Irene.
Because of, there are a host of things. So
we're a border town.
And that's right, we're a border town. And not every town has what we have, which is a good thing. It attracts people to our community. I often hear people coming into our community and tell me how unique it is and how wonderful that the shops are, and how they like the eclectic flavor of our community. And so that's an asset to us that I don't think that we have been using to our financial advantage. Dora?
Well, we are a regional economy, and we're a regional economy on a border town in a state that doesn't have taxes. And the fact of the matter is, most people aren't sitting here looking at the list saying what's exempt and what's not exempt. They just know there's an extra percentage of sales tax. And most people aren't thinking about what they're paying sales tax on and what they're not. It's much more complicated in this state than it is in, say, New Jersey, where you know clothes are not taxed, but other things are. And everybody has a sales tax. New York has a sales tax. Pennsylvania has a sales tax. Everybody has a sales tax, so it doesn't matter which state you go to. Here, it does matter because from a regional standpoint, there are a lot of people who decide to go to Keene because there's no sales tax. And the question is, at what point do people say, oh, I'm not going to go into Brattleboro because the taxes are too high and I'm not going to go. I think that's the thing that a lot of businesses are concerned about. I also think from the standpoint of the psychological impact to businesses which have really been hit by some of the tragedies that we've had in the last year, Irene, the fire in the Brooks house, particularly for downtown businesses, this could possibly be seen as kind of a kick in the mouth that, you know, one more challenge that they have to overcome. So, you know, I certainly, I have stated all along that I've never been in favor of a 1% sales tax. I think to put in a 1% sales tax and still have the taxes go up 5%, I think that's a real problem. I think it's a real issue. 5 cents, so I think, you know, I think whether we do a 1% sales tax or we don't do a 1% sales tax, coming up with this money and not having it affect the cost of living for the residents of Brattleboro it's going to be a serious issue.
But you're saying you'd rather see the taxes go up on a Brattleboro resident go up 10% rather than 5%?
No, I'm saying I don't want the taxes. I'm saying that the 5% or 10% is too high a tax rate, and the 1% sales tax is not a good idea.
And so you don't want to do the project. So this discussion is being brought forward, even though I have been a supporter of it for years. This discussion is based around the police fire facility and how we can mitigate the impact on Brattleboro taxpayers in some other way. Now, I know that this is going to impact me when I go to Brown & Roberts or any other store in town, that I'm going to have to pay a little bit more. Is it going to drive me over to Keene? Does Keene have Verdi? Does Keene have any of the stores that we have down on Main Street that people come to Brattleboro for. So I'm not going to leave town for $1 if I went out and bought a $100 item. It's not going to chase me over to Keene. And so some of these arguments that we have, I think, are specious, that everybody's going to run over to Keene. If people are going to go to Keene, they're going right now. So they're going at 6%, and 7% I don't think is going to push people over to Keene, especially the people who are coming to Brattleboro. We are the hub. We're the first stop on 91. People come to Brattleboro, so let's use that. I agree with David. Our taxpayers pay for road improvements, sidewalk improvements, and they're not benefiting from it. Some of the businesses are, and that's not correlating to all these jobs, but they're benefiting from it, and that's great. And so here's an opportunity for this 1% to have a direct impact on all the taxpayers in Brattleboro, and I think that's what should be first and foremost here. Ken or Christopher, did you have anything?
I would agree with Dora, except that observing empirically, I see the opposite with respect to another 1% tax that we have put in place, which is the meals tax, and yet another one, the alcohol tax. Since those taxes have been in place, we have had new restaurants come to town and open up, and we have seen a number of bars open up, and pubs. Let's take a look. I can't remember when fireworks went in on Main Street, but I don't think that they're doing badly. I'd say fireworks is a flaming success. Ha ha ha. I'd say that the new bagel shop on Main Street is a big success. It's very popular. It's doing well. I'd say that the new Whetstone Station is a monumental success, and there's no 1% tax on alcohol that has slowed them down. We have had new places to eat and drink come into town and succeed despite and after the 1% sales tax on both those items. So looking at an empiric success story in two ways, on two different taxes, can you say really seriously that something else will happen with a tax on consumer discretionary, especially when we are seeing the region as well as the country slowly, albeit slowly, coming out of this recession, the unemployment rate falling, albeit slowly, and business formation taking place, albeit slowly. It's something that I see using empirical data, not from an argument that's more philosophical than it is empirical. And we are in the business here of using empirical data. So I have to say, Dora, I just cannot agree with you. I think that you are mistaken. Now, do I think we should have a local sales tax? I'm not sure. I'm still on the fence. But your argument is not cutting any ice with me.
So
Dora?
I need to respond because people are speaking to me. Sorry, Ken.
Okay, I'll go after that.
First of all, what I'm saying is not specious. Chris, what you're talking about doesn't compare because the other states have high meals and alcohol taxes as well. It's a different kind of purchase because when people are shopping for things, they're thinking more about it. Alcohol is not one of those things that you're thinking about. But I do think that there are people who have chosen to go out less because it might cost a little more. I don't think that we can be that clear on the fact that the economy is potentially improving. We're certainly not anywhere out of the weather, and I'm reading forecasts about concerns about the stock market. So, I mean, I don't think we can count on that. But from a philosophical standpoint, this is a philosophical discussion, and it isn't just empirical. And we don't have all the empirical data, as Ken pointed out. So to say that what I'm saying is wrong or specious, when I'm really relaying a lot of concerns that I hear from local businesses and residents. Now, you may disagree with those concerns, but they are very valid and real concerns.
Ken?
So I think part of the frustration too, and why I don't really support the line of argument of, you know, if you don't want this, then this is what you're saying. I'm frustrated because I remember sitting in this room not that long ago with our whole, I want to back up a step, with our whole Wyndham government team, and specifically saying to Senators White, Senators Galbraith, and our 3 representatives that we need alternative avenues of revenue. And we haven't gotten any response on that, and here we are stuck with an either-or option, which I support Dora saying, I don't want this and I don't want this. The problem is that we have no other mechanisms that are being given to us by the people who we are asking to help us. We were very specific in asking them that. So there's that. The other piece for me is that I'm admittedly extraordinarily bad PR hypochondriac, which serves me well in my day job and extends here. You know, I look at when Massachusetts has their tax-free days, and every single time they have it, you have Governor Lynch of New Hampshire getting in every possible media outlet and reminding everyone, we are always tax-free. And so some of it is not just about what people are thinking here, but there are some external forces of people who will go out of their way outside of this town to remind people, look, that border town has taxes, we are always tax-free. Do I think that, I don't want to take that too far and say that Governor Lynch is going to constantly make announcements about Brattleboro's 1% sales tax. I just wish, as David said earlier, there is such a risk involved in things like anticipating PR, which has an effect. You know, PR has an effect. I wish there was a way we can measure that, and I'm frustrated because I know there's not. So that's why I'm just trying to parse out all the different things that we can wrap our minds around. I just wish we had more options for revenue.
Well, we're pretty much at a point in this process where we're going to have to make a decision whether we're going to spend $14.5 million to rebuild the police and fire facilities in town. And everything that I've heard says that we need to spend the money to do that. I mean, I haven't heard anybody come into these meetings and say the police and fire facilities are adequate, or that we can go for another 25 or 50 years with these same police and fire facilities. So we got to spend $14.5 million on this public works project. And the amount of money that our residential and business real estate taxes are going to have to be raised if we don't have another source to pay for this is going to be astronomical. Just look at the numbers at the bottom of the page, and that's why I think we really seriously need to consider the 1% sales tax. I absolutely agree with Dora. Taxes shouldn't be going up, but taxes are going to be going up to build these facilities, and these facilities have to be rebuilt unless the taxpayers say, no, forget it, we're not going to do it, we're going to leave it just the way it is. And somebody's going to be paying for it, and spreading it more broadly seems to me to be a good idea. And that's why I asked for it to be on today's agenda, too, to start this discussion, because everybody's going to have to participate in this discussion, making this decision. I don't want it to be a surprise at a meeting that's not on TV, and I don't want it to be a surprise when we get to the town meeting to make this decision.
Mr. Agavi.
If I were to ask to what extent 30 cents a day would impact the lives of any of the 6 of you, it probably wouldn't seem like much. 30 cents a day. But if you spend 30 cents a day, you could just fund, that's $100 extra. I noticed the difference between funding this with or without the tax money. When I look at a house of $100,000, it's about $100 a year more to not use the sales tax. 30 cents a day. If you feel you are representative of the residents of this town, you're in, because you can fund the whole thing through the property tax, because 30 cents a day is nothing. So it's a real, it's perhaps another perspective here. If it's probably easier for the lower incomes people in this town to bear if it is all done through property taxes because of the income sensitivity program of the state, which caps taxes for low income. That would mean, of course, a little higher taxes for the higher income. But if what this is all about, what our residents can afford, then I think to go entirely as a property tax is the more fair way to go. Something else I've thought about, and I speak now as a long-time town meeting rep. If these two issues are linked, the 1% tax and the property tax and the project are all balled up into one discussion, I can't even imagine how that will go, because there will be, it feels like, I may be mistaken, but it feels like there are too many very important, very significant, and very opposing interests pulling people different ways. And I would recommend, and now this is personally, that more, if not most, if not all, of the project be funded through taxes, if it's worth doing at all, and that still bears analysis.
One correction on one thing you did say, that the income sensitivity provision is on the educational side and not on the municipal side. I think the last time I checked, roughly 71% of our community is on income sensitivity in terms of the impact on their educational taxes. Ken?
I mean, I think this is just a minor word addition, but I get a little nervous that these conversations are going to be taken out of context and overly simplified. The question is not whether we can afford 30 cents a day. The insertion I would add is whether we can afford 30 more cents a day. This isn't a tax in isolation of other things. It accrues on top of other things that we're already paying. And so I just get nervous about this being represented, well, who can't afford 30 cents a day? Well, I'm sure many people can, but it's 30 cents on top of things that other people are already paying. So I just want to be a little bit careful about that.
I really also, Spoon, have significant questions about the accuracy of your belief that it's fairer to do this by real estate taxes rather than by including sales tax and real estate tax, because excluded from the sales tax are food and clothing items. So people who are living on lower incomes, who are spending a larger percentage of their disposable income on food and clothing, won't be impacted by this sales tax at all. So I've got real concerns about your conclusion and about its accuracy, that it's fairer on lower income people to fund this through real estate taxes rather than through a combination of real estate and sales tax.
Last comment.
Yeah, I might just suggest taking a look at a composition I made for one of our budget discussions last year. I can't remember the date, but I was trying to figure out in my own head where a 1% sales tax would make sense, and perhaps that should be just put up on the website. Do you remember that piece? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I reread it, and I was trying to come to the conclusion that we shouldn't have one, but when you read this piece, it comes down pretty much solidly. It comes down solidly in favor of a sales of the tax, and it's mainly because it is much more of a cost-sharing measure with those who use our services. And I think that's really a bottom line issue. And when you talk about fairness, is it fair to have everyone in Brattleboro funding the services that more than just the people in Brattleboro take advantage of? And that's a philosophical question, but it's a very worldly philosophical discussion to have. I would just like to suggest that be made, that circulate somehow, Barb. I'm not sure how.
All right, thank you. I think that,
Just clarification, the sales tax would have to be approved by town meeting representative?
yes, it would.
And if the facility is approved and if this is approved by the board, both of those votes would happen at the special town meeting?
Special town meeting, correct.
Barbara's non-thing?
Well,
Be up to the board.
it would be up to the board, but I most think it would be a board discussion to say we would bring both of these items forward. So it could be that they both go forward at the same time, or one goes forward before the other. So that'll be a discussion by the whole board.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I want to thank the board members for a good, healthy discussion on this. It's certainly in the beginning and not at the end, and food for thought for everyone out there. Next item.
Paint pavement. We have two folks here. Maybe it fits you guys
I bet they were
a bit.
glad they came early.
This is a project the residents, some of the residents of Myrtle and Cedar Street came forward to the traffic safety to talk about a proposed paint the pavement project. I think I discussed a little bit. A paint the pavement project is either at intersections or at different places on kind of local streets where neighbors get together, organize themselves, and do kind of a public mural on the street itself. Just to be clear, it's not traffic calming, but it's neighborhood building. Okay, so what traffic safety did is we had a specific request from the residents at Cedar and Myrtle who did all the research, had a design, which is in the packet, gave you a proposal, and traffic safety then said, well, we should really look at kind of some general policies and procedures to establish this program in Brattleboro, and then ask the board if that's something that they'd be interested in actually establishing. The Traffic Safety Committee also then recommended that if the board approves the kind of the general policies and procedures, that we limit this first time to having one pilot kind of project and utilizing the Cedar and Myrtle Street neighborhood to serve as that pilot neighborhood. So with that, what the board has is kind of a summary of what a paint the pavement project would be. It has a kind of the installation agreements and that would be signed, and then it also then has the specific Cedar and Myrtle proposal. Just real quickly, where this would happen, it could happen at an intersection or a street section, but it would have to be a Class 3 roadway with speed limits of 25 miles per hour or less. You would have this proposes an initial approval of the site granted by the Public Works Director, the Police Chief, and that's kind of at the discretion of those two folks. Then there's an application that comes in, and the application is reviewed first gets the approval of the Public Works, Police Chief, Town Manager, and then comes before the board for final approval. Applications would need to have support from the neighborhoods. You would want signatures 100% of the adjacent residents. Those are the people that are right in front of the mural. And then 60% of the residents that are on the project street frontage for standard block or 2 standard blocks. They would then also get, their applicant would also get a street blocking permit. The outline of the project talks about appropriate designs. You can't use anything, you can't use kind of logos or anything that replicates traffic safety devices or that would depict animals or persons. The paint would be, all of the paint and the supplies, et cetera, would be purchased at the expense of the neighborhood, and although they would be in conjunction with the Public Works Director as far as what types of paint would be allowed. The applicant would be responsible for kind of the upkeep of the mural, touch-ups, those types of things. The period for the permit would be a year, and then after a year it could be renewed. And with the renewal process being less stringent than the original process, because you wouldn't have to do the petitions again with the neighbors and that type of thing. So I don't know if the board would like first just to talk about in general on the proposed policies and procedures, and then talk about the proposed pilot project.
Yes.
Ken first?
I guess my question is why we're not using, or at least incorporating in, the Town Arts Committee's public art policy, which is much more extensive than this. Because this strikes me as public art. And so, and with a purpose of community building, but they already have a pretty well established, with tons of criteria, policy. So why would we not route it through the committee that is already doing this?
Part of the issue is that initially we had more concerns because of it being on streets and actually where people are driving and things like that. So we wanted some of the initial control kind of in with that, again, looking at it from more of a public works infrastructure issue. You could have the part of the vetting process be with the Arts Committee, but you couldn't. I mean, and I kind of thought as we were looking at these, you could have that the proposal goes from the Public Works Director to, and then gets vetted through the Arts Committee. You could add that, but it really, again, would need to be initially. I think because of it being on streets and some of the issues with streets, you'd want it through the public.
I get that. I get the first piece. I'm just, at some point it's public art and not being routed through the committee that's public art, that has the policies. I totally get why it's starting where it starts, but it just strikes me that at some point it should go through that committee.
Good.
Christopher?
Yeah, we're being asked here to, it's suggested in the administrative report that we do essentially 2 things with one motion, but what I would like to do is to move to approve the paint the pavement policies and procedures and vote on a separate motion on authorizing that pilot project. Any objection to that? I would like to so move that then, to approve the paint the pavement policies and procedures.
We can do that administratively. We don't have to have a motion to do that. Dave?
It's on the floor then.
Yeah.
I have some changes that I wanted to see to the body of the policies and procedures. They were handed out for the first time at the Traffic Safety Committee meeting, and I had a chance to read through them, and I made some suggestions, but I didn't have a chance before reviewing this pile of papers in preparation for tonight's meeting to go through them. So I have some edits, and once again, I don't want to take up meeting time to go through them. Logistically, in response to what Ken inquired about the Arts Committee, I think this specific Paint the Pavement project proposal was developed with a representative from the Town Arts Committee serving as an advisor through the process. And it came to traffic safety, and we at the Traffic Safety Committee concluded that it was necessary to develop a process and a procedure and a policy as a whole. If we need to add to the procedure or policy, that the project will be reviewed and approved by the Town Arts Committee. I don't have any problem with that. I don't really know that I think it's necessary for this specific project here. And so I would hate to hold up the Cedar and Myrtle proposal, which is being proposed as a pilot project, by sending it to the Arts Committee when they've already spent quite a bit of time vetting the project and working with a representative from the committee to develop it.
Dora?
Is approving the pilot project, is it necessary to approve the guidelines and policy to do the pilot project, since the pilot project is already, the reason for the pilot project is that it's gone through these guidelines? So we can, I mean, David's saying that he has some edits. There's questions about the Arts Committee. I think I would like to bring the Arts Committee in on the discussion and talk about this. And so maybe we don't need to approve this policy in order to get the pilot project going, which I fully support.
Ken?
So that's one thing, and I can get behind that, but I would not support approving a policy and then exempting out the pilot project from what we're looking at. So I get that if we're going to move on the policy, which I would like to amend to include the arts policy, then it wouldn't make any sense to me to exempt the pilot project from going that route. So I agree with Chris, we need to separate these two things out. But I can't support the pilot project if we're going to vote on the policy tonight.
Right, and in fact, I think the way I phrased the motion at the Traffic Safety Committee meeting was that we present the policy to the board, and that we ask the board to consider and approve the pilot project as long as it complies in general with the procedures set forth in the proposed policy.
Barb?
Okay.
You may think that's circular. It kind of sounds circular,
It does.
particularly when I just said it.
Yes.
I guess I'm trying to figure out the goal.
Yeah.
And the goal is to, there was some concern about a paint the pavement program, from Public Works and from police and my, from me. And the idea of the pilot isn't, the idea of doing a pilot project is to test the policies and procedures. So to separate those seems funny, and to say, well, we won't do the policies and procedures, but we'll let this other folks do it, their project, because I don't want to slow them down, doesn't, to me, from this, where I sit, make sense. I don't think that there is anything, oh my God, what's going to happen if we don't have a paint the project policy at Myrtle and Cedar by, a month. It would be unfortunate because there are folks who've been working and they'd like to have it done, but I don't think in the role of administering this type of, starting this new type of thing in a town where we've had issues with our pavement makes sense. I think that obviously I appreciate the goodwill of the neighborhood, and I appreciate the goodwill that the board's trying to give to the neighbors to allow them to move forward. But I think the bigger role is policy at this level, and that we should remain focused on the policies.
Dora?
Well, I'm a little leery about saying that the reason for the pilot project is to test the policies, because my feeling is that the project came first and that the policies are meant to control the project. And so it's, I'm a little leery about just saying that that's the only reason for the pilot project is to test these, because the reason is because there's been some interest expressed in the community about the idea of doing these street murals, and the policy has been sort of set out to try to figure out how we're going to go about doing this. It's like we could, the mural could be a success, and that wouldn't necessarily be a measure that the policies that have been set out have worked. So the policies, they are what they are, and I do think that we could approve the project based on the policies that exist now, but say, let's look at the policies and really talk about them a little more in depth.
Christopher?
I'd like to ask how soon or how much a delay would delay this project so that it's not practical for this year. I mean, we have, a couple more months of good weather left. Barb, when did these people want to start?
I would ask them.
Oh, great.
And please state your name for the record, please.
Tina Hilston. Our steering committee for this project has already determined that we can't get it done this fall.
Oh.
So there is no burning fire to settle this. We think we're going to start it next spring, or as soon as it's warm enough that we can reasonably work with the pavement. But we would like to start getting our permissions done while we have the momentum going. We have flyered the neighborhood a couple of times, so at the moment people know what this project is. And so we'd like to use some of that momentum to get our petitions signed, get pledges, get our budgets done, and then actually go forward in the spring.
Thank you very much.
Ken?
So notwithstanding your desire for momentum, which I certainly support and often greases many wheels, I just don't like doing things this way, where we have this one project but we don't have the policy in place, and we're talking about looking at one project on an existing policy that we just really haven't vetted. So I would like us to see us amend this policy and then subsequent to that approve any future projects.
And I think that works great. I have some very basic line edits. You want to add the Town Arts Committee. Maybe everybody can get edits to this back to Barb within a week, and we can put it on the next agenda for approval.
We can do it quite fast.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a lot to be done.
Great.
There you go. That's what we'll do.
There's a motion on the floor.
There's a motion on the floor, so we need a motion to withdraw or a motion to table until...
Well, why don't we, I'd like to move that we table this then. I don't think I want to withdraw it, because I would like to, frankly, I would like to approve it when appropriate. So let's just table it.
We'll table it until September 18th.
It's the 18th. The arts committee unfortunately doesn't meet until then, but hopefully they can.
Yeah, well, and that was the purpose of my thinking, and give more time, was to actually let the arts committee have a discussion about it.
Let me ask a point of information here. Suppose we do table this, and it looks like we should wait, in 2 weeks we should wait another 2 weeks. Is that a problem? If we table something, it can stay on the table for a while?
Yep,
Okay.
as long as we want it.
Do you guys have any comments on the policies? You've seen it before.
I've taken off my BCTV hat. Yeah, I'm on the Town Arts Committee, and we have had discussion about this at our last meeting, so if it's necessary, I'm sure Kate would call a special meeting for us to discuss it if you want to do it before your next select board meeting. But it has been discussed by us as a public arts project.
Right. Thank you.
I just want to say that our steering committee has looked at the protocol for the town arts projects, and we actually worked with that, and I think that's very sensible to combine them. And as a steering committee, we haven't had a chance to thoroughly discuss the guidelines that the town put forward, but personally I think they're very reasonable, and I feel that they're coming out of the kind of process that we're trying to go through to do this in a really, to keep the community spirit, but also to do it in a way that really fits for the town.
I guess I would recommend to you that you keep that momentum going and go door to door to continue your process. I see this only as a minor formality here for us.
I think we do need you to approve the policy before we go door to door, because there is the petition paperwork that is part of
That's
what the
right.
policy was, so.
Hopefully we'll have that done.
We'll
soon.
try to get that as soon as you've gone through your process.
Thank you. Yes.
When we appeared before the traffic committee, I believe that we were reduced to a 1-block radius of the intersection, which would be so much easier.
It says 1 in some places and 2 in other places.
And
I was
one
thinking
said
1
It was
is
supposed to
probably.
say 1. It was, I noticed that, it was supposed to say 1.
Good. Thank
Sorry
you.
about
Before it
that.
said
Two
4
is-
blocks.
that's-
Yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
4 blocks.
Dora, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that, just sort of in reference to Ken's concerns about the Arts Committee, and this is not the first thing that's come before us in the last couple of months where there are dual purposes, and one committee that looks at something hasn't had, it hasn't been brought before that committee, and so I would just like to say that maybe if all of the boards and committees can be given at least the missions and purposes of all of the boards and committees, so that they know if there's, and if there's somebody staffing the committee, that they know that there's another. I mean, there are things that the planning commission is supposed to be responsible for that other committees are looking at, but there's not necessarily conversations between those two boards and committees. And Conservation Commission as well, there's been a number of things that have come before us that would, so I would just like to say that I would like to start seeing things go to those boards and committees before they come to us. Because all of those boards and committees that have responsibility, and it may turn out that one board or committee will say, you go ahead and deal with that because we don't, but there should at least be, it should be on their radar, it should be given to them, they should be talking about it as a board or committee.
Just a suggestion, I think might be constructive, and that is that as part of this program we've had to meet one of our goals of getting familiar with all the committees, how about if we invite the Arts Committee to appear to talk about itself at the next meeting? I mean, they're going to be up and in front of us, I would imagine, anyway, and if they were here, I think that would foster the communication that we all feel is important. Just a suggestion.
Okay.
At the library coming to the next meeting.
Yeah, we have library coming, so we'll
Oh,
get.
library. Oh, okay.
They're going to be coming.
Okay.
Okay, so
Thank you.
did I hear that we
Thanks.
have a motion on the
Oh,
floor
yeah, we should probably vote.
to table?
Okay. Chris made the motion.
And we'll take a friendly amendment to table.
I move to
So
table.
it's a separate-
Okay.
Accept.
All those in favor of tabling this motion till 9:18, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? 5-0.
Thank you.
Next.
Thank you. Next, the board's asked to accept and appropriate a $50,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. There is a $10,000 cash match that's required from the town. And Ron Francis is here to talk to the grant, et cetera. The $10,000 is recommendation before the board is $5,000 from CDBG program income and the remaining $5,000 from either general fund or another grant source. So let Rod talk about the funding, the grant itself, and then also because there are other funding sources that are involved in this.
You're up.
Hello. On July 13th, we received word that our application to the National Endowment for the Arts, our town grant program, had been accepted. And then we received a letter dated August 23rd confirming that we'd received a grant award. All NEA grants are a one-for-one match, or one of their dollars matched by the grantees or the grantors' funds. So as part of the process for putting the application together, we had given the NEA a budget to review. You see that contained in my memo. It identifies $10,000 in hard cash from the town of Brattleboro and a further $10,000 in kind. That in kind is made up of two components. One is planning services department time, and the other is the grant manager's time to manage the grant and report out on the grant. Then you also see 3 different items, basically, from various foundations, including the Vermont Arts Council. In the time since we submitted the grant application, we've had confirmation from the Vermont Arts Council that they can make an in-cash contribution of some significance, which represents their support for the project. And then we budgeted obtaining a further $10,000 from private donors, giving the town, or as managers of the grant, a $50,000 target to reach. So that budget was acceptable to the NEA, and so the next step for us is to actually go ahead with the signing of a grant agreement between us as the managers of the grant and the NEA. And for us to do that, we need to do the accept and appropriation process, which is what I'm here for.
Christopher?
Yeah, Rod, did you say, I was listening to try to discern if you said whether Foundation A and Foundation B have been identified yet, and that they...
We've got some deadlines coming up for various local foundations or foundations that give to local organizations. There's 3 that we have in mind, and they have deadlines of October the 1st and November the 1st.
Okay.
And so we've targeted those, and we're in discussions with other entities as well.
Oh, okay.
And on the basis of receiving the grant, we're already receiving positive feedback.
Well, good. Thanks.
Dave?
I just have a question about the uses of the funds. $25,000 for administration and then $25,000 for awards/fees seems like a very significant amount of money for, it's not exactly clear to me what.
The grant is made up of 3 tracks. The first track is a basic planning exercise, which would be a cultural asset mapping activity. The second is another planning exercise which focuses on the concept of a cultural district. Cultural districts are now being identified by state planning agencies across the country as designated areas of targeted investment or preferential treatment on the part of municipalities and state entities, and as target destinations for funding sources. And then the third one, which is designed to open up some questions about the arts in Brattleboro and engage the local community. And by that I mean not just the artistic community, but the community with the arts. And that is a juried award for a public art, either a visual art product or a production. And so there are costs associated with putting together the nationally recognized panel that would review the contestants' applications for that. And it's budgeted out on that basis. So bringing the jurors together, advertising the competition, and so on and so forth. And then awarding a prize to the winner.
Where in the general fund are you looking at $5,000?
Well, most narrowly, the Planning Services Department has a budget line for professional services, and the consulting fees that we would expect to incur as part of this project could come from there. But there are other opportunities that we'd want to explore, including other grant opportunities. So in light of Hurricane Irene, there's some funding opportunities. One of the issues that we've identified as a potential topic for the competition is dialogue around the changed physical environment as a consequence of Irene and the impact on the community. And we feel that there are other grant opportunities that we could use, that we could pursue to offset that general fund obligation.
Any other questions? Motion, please.
I move to accept and appropriate a $50,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts and to authorize the expenditure of $5,000 from the VCDP program income and $5,000 from the general fund or other grant sources.
Further discussion, Dora?
Well, I just want to thank the Arts Committee. I know I certainly was one of the naysayers when this first came up about whether or not we could get an application in on time and whether or not it would work. And there were a number of people out there who also had doubts. And I want to thank the staff and the Arts Committee, and particularly Kate Anderson, for their contributions to this application.
Very good. Further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion on the floor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
The board now is asked to approve an anti-displacement policy. This is a policy required by Vermont Community Development Programs, or VCDP. The purpose of the policy is to ensure that VCDP funding is not utilized to eliminate housing for low-income persons. Basically, what you're approving here is already part of the federal register for the federal laws with regard to the use of, as you know, community development funding is federal funding. So what you're approving is a policy that basically acknowledges that you will follow 24 CFR Part 42, because that's where it comes from. I believe that the reason for having the separate approval is so that there is acknowledgement at the local level of concerns with regard to utilizing VCDP funding for the elimination of low-income housing.
Yes, Christopher.
Barbara, are we already, by any chance, conforming with this?
Yes.
Okay, so this is simply a matter of putting into black and white current practice?
We had already had a residential anti-displacement relocation plan. This was signed, it expired, and so this is a renewal.
Renewal, thank you.
A motion, please.
Well, I will move to approve the anti-displacement policy as presented.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you.
There was a request that the select board goals be placed on the agenda for review and discussion.
Ken, I believe that this was your request.
That was my
probably
request.
Because your goals that you recommended are just about done. So below as you will.
I think we need stars to paste on his forehead.
No, I that's not actually why I requested it, but I do enjoy that piece. It was more because I figured if we just got our select board checks, that means we're halfway through our term, and halfway through our term means we're halfway through our term, so we should probably check in with how we're doing with our goals. That's about all the insight I had for this item.
Well, Barb,
Can I make a couple of comments? For folks, one of the goals was the police fire facility. We've continued to make progress on that and are moving towards, hopefully, a representative town meeting where there'll be a vote on that. Next is town committees and board standards. There's a standard rules of operation. I do not believe there has been that we have the committees, the town committees now have a kind of handbook that they're utilizing that's been standardized.
Which, by the way, has in the manual a list of all the committees and what their charges are. So maybe we should move towards getting that online, because the only people who would have received it are the people who are...
Actually, we gave it to all the staff liaisons to give to their committees, so the committees would have it. Most committees do have a hard copy of it.
Awesome.
Standard policy, use of media and the social media. The social media there's going to be another meeting on that. Establishment of best practices for public participation. That has not occurred. An establishment of a regular reporting schedule. We have been having the committees come. Increased town government accessibility and transparency. We have completed kind of a major overhaul of the website. Consider alternative means of participating. Increase and diversified access for public participation. Quarterly public forums at varying locations. There's not been work done on those last three.
You're going so fast. Can we stop and pause at some of these?
Mhm.
So we can actually check in. What kind of feedback are you getting on the website?
Very positive.
Just want the opportunity to put that out there.
No, it's been very positive. Thank you. And financial oversight and budgeting. Tonight you discussed the debt service and fund balance policies. Oversight capital improvement plan, town service review, employment costs. I don't really remember what that is. And then alternative revenues of the 1% sales tax. You started that discussion tonight. Brooks House redevelopment. The town has been supportive of a slum and blight grant. We've been also working closely with the individuals, with other helping the Brooks House with other development. They're actually going to be going before the DRB this month. Pedestrian bike safety improvements. We have made several variety of improvements. We have also put in a grant for some infrastructure improvements. We have that continues to be an ongoing process, and we are now, the Traffic Safety Committee is looking in more general terms of how having more criteria for infrastructure improvements and or traffic calming devices. Removal of housing from the floodway and the flood fringe. We are working with, assisting with the Housing Authority on the work that they've been doing. The town planning director sits on the committee that's looking at moving some of the BHA housing. With regard to Tri-Park, we have had a request from them, and we have begun working on a planning grant for CDBG disaster recovery funding. So we are working on those. Review of the downtown improvement district. We have not started some of our work on that. Staff culture and diversity. We haven't really been doing the work on that. Planning and zoning. Review and rewrite of the town zoning ordinance. That's not hasn't been started and wouldn't be started until the town plan has come before the board. Review and an analysis of rental housing inspections, building codes, sustainability, building codes for public projects. There's not been work done on that. And integrating the town plan into decision making. The board has received its copies of the town plan and of the proposed town plan that is going for public hearing this month by the Planning Commission, and will be coming before the board after that.
When?
After that,
October.
October. Thank you.
It's probably October unless there would be a substantial change from the hearing.
Thank you.
further comments?
So all in all, there's been movements on quite a few of these.
Okay, next up.
Board's asked to appoint me as the town representative to the Vermont League of Cities and Towns business meeting.
I move to appoint Barbara Sondag as the town representative of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns business meeting.
You want to go?
No?
Oops.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed?
Wyndham Regional Commission?
Actually, I skipped
Yeah, okay.
Did you read this out?
Wyndham Regional
Yes.
Commission. I missed it on my administrative report, sorry. The board's asked to appoint Timberly Hunt to the Wyndham Regional Commission.
I move to appoint Timberly Hunt to the Wyndham Regional Commission.
Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, 5-0.
The board is asked to schedule a special meeting to discuss the draft social media policy and the police fire facilities project. One meeting,
One meeting.
double your fun.
Ooh, free pizza.
Nighttime meeting? Probably a 2-hour meeting, so
2 hours.
nighttime works for 2-hour meetings better. Today is the 4th. How does the 10th work for everybody?
5 o'clock?
10th at 5 o'clock.
Can we,
I can't
can we just do,
do that.
or not just, but can we do the 11th? Just because I already have Tuesday night set aside.
Well, the 11th is Tuesday night.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh,
For
you-
this.
Oh, you have the
Yeah.
11th set aside for this. Does that work for everybody? The 11th?
So we're talking about the 11th?
Instead of the 10th, the 11th. Okay,
What time?
5 o'clock.
That's, oh yeah, I'll be done by then. Can we make sure that, we have BCTV televising that?
We can
Or at
ask them.
least, taping it.
Okay.
I'd like to make sure that we have some discussion before the meeting in terms of how it's going to be formatted and how the time's going to be used. All right, so
Yeah.
maybe before Tuesday, we
Yeah.
can sit down and talk in the informal agenda setting.
Yep,
That's a week from today.
it's a week from today, that's right. Today,
I believe people were gonna, with regard to the social media, my recollection was people were gonna send me some suggestions if they had that.
Was that the plan? I can.
yeah,
I've not,
you have not received anything yet? So if you have any requests with the social media plan, get
if
those.
people send their ideas and we can compile those and get them out so that we, just to keep it moving a little bit.
My hope was that we could pull from some other towns that have one already.
I
So
have
all my
contacted
suggestions
the
are
league.
covered by other towns.
WRC be a resource on that to help us, so we don't have to invent the wheel looking for this information?
Well, this is the model policy that
It's the
the
model
LCT
policy from
Right,
the
yeah, I
league,
wanna
and I
see
have,
people who
I
would-
have contacted the league to ask
Who's got one?
who's utilizing it.
Got that too.
I'm more interested in utilization.
Meetings.
On Wednesday, September 5th, 2012, from 7 to 9 p.m., the Development Review Board will be meeting here in the Select Board Meeting Room. On Thursday, September 6th at 6:30 p.m., the Skate Park Committee will be meeting in the Hannah Cosman Meeting Room. On Monday, the 10th at 5 p.m., the Energy Committee will be meeting in the Hannah Cosman Room. At 6 p.m., also on Monday the 10th, the Planning Commission will be meeting here in the Select Board Meeting Room. Also on Monday the 10th, the Rec and Parks Board will be meeting at 6 p.m. in the Gibson-Aiken Center. On Tuesday, September 11th at 4:30 p.m., the Finance Committee will be meeting in the Hannah Cosman Room. At 4:30 p.m. also, the Wastewater Treatment Plant Upgrade Oversight Committee will be meeting. It doesn't say where.
At the plant.
At the plant. So everyone should go to the plant. At 5 p.m., the Select Board will be holding a special session. At 7 p.m., the Tree Advisory Committee will be meeting in the Hannah Cosman Room. On Friday, the 14th at 10 a.m., the ADA Advisory Committee will be meeting at the Marlborough College Graduate Center. On Monday, September 17th at 7 p.m., the Development Review Board will be meeting in the Select Board Meeting Room. On Tuesday, the 18th at 4 p.m., the Arts Committee will be meeting in the Hannah Cosman Room. At 6 p.m., the West River Park Committee will be meeting in the Gibson-Aiken Center. And at 6:15 p.m., the Select Board will have our next regularly scheduled meeting. And with that, I motion to adjourn.
All those in favor of the motion on the floor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, 5-0. Thank you, BCTV. Thank you, press.